The Galactic Council had called it madness. Commander Vexthor of the Krillian Empire had called it suicide, but Dr. Sarah Chen had simply smiled that peculiar human smile and walked into the quarantine zone anyway. The Void Plague had ravaged the colony on Arcturus 7 for 3 standard weeks. Every species in the known galaxy had deemed it a lost cause. The infected, adults of every spacefaring race, had been evacuated to isolation wards where they would die with dignity. But the children, the cubs, the hatchlings, they remained in the colony's central nursery, trapped behind emergency bulkheads that no one dared open. The disease was merciless. Mortality rate 98%. Transmission rate near instantaneous through airborne vectors. Every simulation, every algorithm, every rational analysis screamed the same conclusion: do not enter. Let the automated systems provide what comfort they could until the inevitable occurred. Humans, as the galaxy was learning, had a complicated relationship with the word inevitable. Sarah had spent 48 hours in the laboratory, her dark eyes fixed on holographic displays that rotated protein structures and viral genealogies. She consumed stimulants that would have killed a Krillian and ignored sleep cycles that would have driven a Xantharian mad. Her colleagues had pleaded. Her superiors had ordered. The council had forbidden. She went anyway. The decontamination airlock hissed behind her, sealing with a finality that made the observation crew flinch. Through the reinforced glass, they watched her walk down the corridor in nothing but a standard hazmat suit. Technology that every expert agreed was insufficient. She's condemning herself, Vexthor muttered, his chitinous plates rattling with distress. For nothing. The children are already gone. Dr. Corazel, a Xantharian physician, touched her tentacles to the glass. No, watch her vitals. Her heart rate is steady. Humans don't go steady when they're afraid. Then what is she? Determined. Inside the nursery, 73 children waited. They represented 12 species, ranging from newborn Graxian hatchlings no bigger than Sarah's hand, to adolescent Krillians whose carapaces hadn't yet hardened. They lay in cribs, on mats, in environmental pods designed for their specific biologies, and they were dying. Sarah's suit sensors screamed warnings as she entered. Viral load, critical. Contamination, absolute. Recommended action, immediate evacuation. She muted the alarms and got to work. What the galaxy hadn't understood. What they couldn't understand because their evolution had taken different paths was that humans were persistence hunters. Not the fastest, not the strongest, but the ones who simply refused to stop. 10,000 generations of chasing prey across African savannas had encoded something into human DNA that no other species possessed. The absolute, stubborn, irrational refusal to accept defeat when protecting their pack. And Sarah Chen had just adopted 73 children. She moved from child to child with methodical precision. The synthesizer she designed in those sleepless 48 hours hummed at her hip, producing individualized antivirals on demand. It shouldn't work. The plague mutated too quickly, adapted too readily. But Sarah had done something no alien scientist had considered. She'd stopped trying to outsmart the virus. Instead, she'd made it irrelevant. The human immune system was a savage thing, evolved to fight off thousands of pathogens simultaneously. What Sarah had created wasn't a cure, it was a translator. A bridge that taught each child's immune system to fight the way a human's would, dirty, overwhelming, and without mercy. Hours passed. The observation crew watched in silence as Sarah moved through the nursery like a ghost, injecting, monitoring, adjusting. She sang to the children, an old Earth lullaby that the translation systems couldn't quite parse. She held the smallest ones against her chest, despite the contamination risk. She whispered to the ones old enough to understand fear, and her voice carried promises that statistics said she couldn't keep. Her viral load is approaching lethal levels, Corazel reported, her voice hollow. Then why isn't she dead? Vexthor demanded. On the monitors, Sarah's immune system was staging a war. The Void Plague attacked. Her body counterattacked. The virus adapted. Her antibodies adapted faster. It was brutal, cellular warfare, and somehow, impossibly, she was winning. At hour 19, the first cub stirred. A young Xantharian, barely past infancy, opened its eyes and reached for Sarah's hand. At hour 23, vital signs began stabilizing across the board. At hour 31, Sarah collapsed. The emergency team that breached the quarantine found her unconscious on the floor, surrounded by 73 children in various states of recovery. The smallest Graxian hatchling had crawled onto her chest and refused to be moved. Sarah woke 3 days later in medical isolation. The doctors told her she'd come within minutes of death, that she'd pushed her body beyond every safe limit, that she'd violated a dozen regulations and ignored direct orders from the council itself. She'd asked only one question: the children? Recovering. All of them. When they finally cleared her for release, Sarah walked slowly back to the nursery. Her body still ached. Her immune system was rebuilding. The doctors said she'd need weeks of rest. The door opened. 73 children looked up. 73 faces, scaled, furred, feathered, and everything in between, lit up with recognition. Sarah smiled. They tackled her anyway. The observation footage would become legendary across the galaxy. A small human woman buried under a pile of alien children, all of them chirping, clicking, purring, and making the joyful sounds of their respective species. Sarah laughing as tiny claws and tentacles and wings embraced her, the young Krillian being careful with his developing spikes, the Xantharian cubs forming a protective circle, the Graxian hatchlings singing their gratitude in ultrasonic frequencies that made her suit sensors chime. Commander Vexthor watched the recording for the 5th time, his plates rattling in what his species expressed as respect. "I don't understand," he admitted. "By every logical measure, she should have left them. Should have saved herself." Dr. Corazel's tentacles rippled in the Xantharian expression of understanding. "That's because you're thinking like someone who survives," she said softly. "Humans, they're the species that looked at survival and said not good enough. They don't just want to live. They want everyone to live, even when it's impossible. Especially then." On the screen, Sarah was still smiling, still buried under grateful children, still proving that sometimes, just sometimes, the word impossible simply meant a human hadn't tried yet.